Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Michael Pope. He is a journalist, he is an author of 5 books, and he's also a podcaster. Thank you so much for being here, Michael. I'm so glad that I got on your calendar.
It's great to be here in the Inside Scoop studio. I've been watching your show for a very long time, and you have this great Capitol image here. I'm particularly fond of this ledge with the reflective surface. So
yeah, it is amazing.
Having seen this on television for so long, it's great to actually be here in person. So thanks for having me.
Well, you've hit the big time, because let me tell you, Fairfax Public Access, we have it going on here. So some of our viewers may know you from Pod Virginia, which is your twice weekly podcast, which started out as Transition Virginia, I believe in 2020. Is that correct?
You are correct, yeah.
Right. So tell me about so you're a journalist, you've authored 5 books, and now you're into podcasting. What has kind of been your journey as far as figuring out how to meet what I would call an unmet need, not just in politics, certainly in politics, but for people in Virginia to understand the climate, our history, and we'll talk more about your book, and why with the demise of local newspapers, it's much more difficult for people to get good information, credible information about the issues that they need to know about, especially as they're electing people who want to represent them. So you started out as a journalist, and where did that take you?
You had a lot packed in there.
I did have a lot.
You're going to have to help me unpack some of that.
Okay, help you unpack it.
In terms of how I started as a journalist, when I was in college, I got a job as essentially the obituary writer. So I would, answer the phone, and there was a weather report, and so the newspaper had like title information. So I'd call up to get the title information. And the obituaries really was the training ground, because to do the obituary you have to know newspaper style, so you have to sort of memorize Associated Press style in terms of what words to capitalize and what words to hyphenate and what words to abbreviate and how to abbreviate them. And so I spent a lot of time writing obituaries, and then sort of the stepping stone up from that is writing the news obituary. So somebody prominent dies, then you call the grieving widow and you get a quote for the newspaper. And so that was very important sort of training in terms of not just how to write a sentence, but how to call up people and get news out of them.
Talk to them, right? Especially when they are grieving because someone died.
Well, as it turns out, so you think that might be a hard job, but it's not like people are hanging up the phone because they want to talk about the loved one who has just recently passed, and they certainly want the newspaper to write a story about it and to have their quote in the newspaper. So it's counterintuitive, but calling the grieving widow is actually really good for a news operation, because that person will clip out that newspaper story and keep it around for years.
True, I have old obituaries myself, I must tell you.
And then, I didn't plan it this way, but then those family members, you've written their obituaries, they later can become good sources over time for all manner of things.
I'll see.
Yeah, which I didn't plan it that way, but even today, I've got lots of sources that I've met because I wrote an obituary many years ago.
And so you moved from obituary writing, then what was your next promotion up to writing what kind of news?
Oh, this is really not very exciting stuff. Student Spotlight, the Teacher of the Year.
But isn't that all?
The GOAT competition.
Right, but in Virginia politics, a lot of the things that you talk about on your podcast really are very local. Not necessarily student spotlights, although you do really drill down to people who are doing extraordinary things. And these are the things that people want to hear about. How do you even decide what it is you're going to write about, or what you're going to choose to do a show on?
Well, that's kind of, there's some mystery wrapped into that. I don't know.
All right, don't give away trade secrets. I'm not asking you to violate.
Even a mystery to me. But so in terms of deciding what a podcast might be about. Right now we're in election season, and there are so many interesting primaries, and so that's been my goal lately, is to look at the 10th congressional district and the 7th congressional district and the 5th congressional district and get all of the candidates. And and I've been working with journalists to talk to them about their reporting. So, I spoke to the journalist who was out in Loudoun County for their speed dating. They've got 12 candidates,
I know.
12 candidates in the Democratic
Yeah.
primary. So they have to do like these speed dating events. And so I got to talk to the journalist who was there for the speed dating event. And then also talked to a journalist that was covering the Alexandria City Council races and the Arlington County Board races. And so yeah, that's been lately the sort of series based on the primary. And then, I don't know, after the primary it'll be summertime, so maybe I'll head to the beach and
Maybe, but you still have to come up with 2 shows a week, so I mean that's a lot of pressure, isn't
We've
it?
got some shows planned, actually. You'll like what you hear coming up on Pod for
Okay,
Jim.
well, I'll let our viewers know that it drops on Tuesday morning and on Thursday morning, and people should subscribe.
Monday morning, and Thursday morning.
You should subscribe.
But you can listen to it on Tuesday.
You can listen any day of the week. In fact, if you miss a bunch of them, you can just catch up, which is what I do. But you do have to, producing content is not a small thing when you have committed yourself to doing 2 shows a week all year. That's a lot of content. And the consistent quality of what you're doing is, to me, very impressive on so many levels. And so I'm always talking about Pod Virginia and the fact that if you don't understand where you came from, and you talk a lot about your book, The Bird Machine, people don't understand why we
Thank you for name dropping it.
I am, because I read it and I liked it. And there's so many characters in history. Nobody talks about Governor Almond anymore. Lindsay Almond. Nobody talks about
Lindsay
him.
Almond, fascinating.
Lindsay Almond. But on a recent podcast, you actually had a video clip. I mean, an audio clip. Audio clip of him talking about massive resistance. So you weave stories of history that are pertinent to how we ended up where we are now. So to me, it seems like your interests seem to have come together in being a really good investigative journalist, but also being deeply interested in history. And then pulling it together with why is the situation where it is right now? And what should people in Virginia know about how these things all intersect? I think that's what's most fascinating about listening to this. And your topics really cover the gamut. During session, obviously, it's about bills, right? But right now, you're doing local elections, and you also have really interesting guests like Chaz Nuttycombe and Sam Shirazi, who I think, you bring this.
Those are our 2 most popular guests.
I know, but you have David Ramadan, and you have journalists from the Washington Post, Tony Olivo and Teo Armas. So you get people to come on, but you have so many interesting people that you get to come on, and then you have a really deep conversation with them that it seems to me is the kind of information people need to understand as they try to figure out who to vote for, what issues to support. In a democracy, the burden is on us. We are the government through our elected representatives, but all of us have to know something in order for democracy to work. Do you have an opinion on that? I mean, or am I just making that up?
Well, I will say you brought up the episode that we did recently with the audio from Lindsay Almond. I totally lucked into that one because it was the news hook there. It was the anniversary of the Brown versus Board decision. And so, one of the things I always want to get into people's heads is how extreme it was a position for Virginia to say, no, we're not going to integrate the schools, we're going to close them. And so, massive resistance is this sort of shocking historical fact that we have to, grapple with. The thing that I lucked into that we did in that podcast is getting audio of Lindsay Almond actually saying this out loud in a way that was very forceful. And that audio came from the Library of Virginia. They've got a great archive. I spend a lot of time at the Library of Virginia going through governor's papers and documents, but they also have lots of photographs and, in this case, audio clips. And so that was actually a very famous speech that, full confession here, I actually had not heard it until the anniversary was happening, and I said, we should definitely use audio from the speech. I had actually written about this speech in the book because it's an infamous speech. Lindsay Almond called it that damn speech because it became a problem for him later in life. And in fact, right after he delivered it, he had to go hat in hand to the General Assembly and ask them to integrate the schools. And so it's a famous speech. And I regret to admit that I'd actually never listened to it until that I was preparing for that podcast, and I got the audio from the Library of Virginia, and it just, this is what I was trying to get at is I lucked into it without, because the news hook was really good. And this story of the bird machine and how it worked is something that I've been fascinated with for a long time.
Because it impacts what we're doing right now, today, and how our politics work. So if you don't understand how we got here or why we got here, and how one person can have such a tremendous impact on...
And his machine.
And
lots
his machine.
of lieutenants.
But generations later, here we are, still stuck with a lot of the things that were put into place. So it's interesting, Cardinal News, Marcus Schmidt, I love Cardinal News. I'm from Southwest Virginia, and Marcus Schmidt is their kind of political reporter. And they did an interesting article, speaking of Lindsay Almond, about the origins of Virginia Western Community College. And the fact that it was a bunch of business people who basically got together in Roanoke and told Lindsay Almond that he had to do something about workforce development, basically. And that, so my brother and sister both went to Virginia Western Community College. So I sent this to my sister. I'm like, did you know the story of how Virginia Western started? And she's like, no, I've never heard this. My point is that there's always history sitting out there yet to be discovered, waiting to be discovered. And there's a trigger, an anniversary, or somebody finds something, and then they bring it to you, and it makes things clearer. It was the first community college. We now have 23 community colleges. But it all goes back to probably that damn speech and the fact that he messed up badly, and then these business...
Trying to atone for it later.
I think that's what it was. I mean, Virginia Western Community College and the start of the community college system may have been an act of atonement. But there's so much history still left to be discovered, and discovering it means we understand more clearly why we are where we are.
So you name-dropped my friend Marcus Schmidt,
Yes.
who is president of the Virginia Capital Correspondents Association. Cardinal News is doing an outstanding job. And I would use that as an example to challenge something you said earlier about the death of local news. I don't think there's a death of local news. I mean, I think that we're in the golden age of news, right? There's also more bad news, fake news. I mean, there's more news in general. But I don't think local news is dead. I don't think it's dying. I mean, it's not done the same way. And, maybe the big newspapers aren't around to do it the way they used to do it. There are fewer journalists like if you think about the press corps in Virginia, like the Virginia Capital Correspondents Association, there are fewer of them around today than there were 20 or 30 years ago. So that is concerning.
Because it's the model, right? Because journalists, however good they are, they still have to eat. I think I'm right on that. So, join us after the break. I am talking with Michael Pope, journalist, author, and podcaster.
I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We? Go to the door, ask for the ball back.
Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead.
I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
See ya, dude. See ya. Remember me and your well.
Nice one. Some friends you are.
Hi.
Hi.
Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice. Holy smile. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again. But an awkward silence can be a great thing, like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and I'm talking with Michael Pope, who is an author, journalist, and a podcaster, Pod Virginia. So when we took a break, we were talking about the golden age of news media. And so I'm kind of convinced that you are onto something here. You have an example of how news that is reported intersects with policymakers, and how, because there are fewer gatekeepers, there is an opportunity for people to engage with media in a way that maybe they haven't before.
You know, I think the issue of gatekeepers is a separate topic, so let's set that aside for a second. But in terms of the golden age of local news, or news in general, the golden age of news, there's just more of it right now. So there's more good journalism right now than ever before. There's also there's more bad journalism right now than ever before, world records, right? But, you know, there's also a lot of really good stuff going on right now. And a recent example was something that happened on your show recently when Delegate Holly Seibold was on Inside Scoop and talked about a bill that she had involving canines in prisons attacking prisoners. And there was like a shocking statistic, about 90-something% of attacks, canine attacks on prisoners happen in Virginia.
Of the nation, in all 50 states, we were by far the highest.
We know this because of journalism. There was an enterprising reporter from Business Insider that FOIA'd the records and did the reporting. Delegate Seibold saw the story, introduced the bill, and, you know, now eventually we might end up having some sort of change. But, you know, that's one example of, you know, the fact that we've got a lot of really good journalism going on right now.
You know, and I think an example of that on Pod Virginia was the whole, should we call it a Glen Dome? I don't know if that's appropriate, but in Alexandria, because, you know, that seemed to come out of nowhere. I mean, it seemed to me that it came out of nowhere, you know, and then suddenly it became, you know, the central political play by the governor, and so many other things seemed like they might hinge on it, because when in fact it did not move forward, a record number of bills got killed. So is there a connection there? I kind of think I see a connection there, but your reporting and other people's reporting too, there was a lot of reporting about who were the players. You were quite persistent in, like, they say they're going to create 30,000 jobs. Show me the jobs.
So years ago, I was at a seminar, like a journalism seminar, and they had this panel discussion about economic development numbers. Are they what they're cracked up to be? And so often, economic development numbers are promises that are not kept. And so when the announcement was made about the arena, I had this little alarm bell going on in the back of my head saying, get the economic development numbers and follow the story, because the promises they're making might not pan out. And so it's important to compare what they promise with what actually happens. So then, you know, that took me down a rabbit hole of trying to get documents and information and numbers that they were not willing to give, despite the fact that they wanted public financing for their project. And in fact, you know, they wanted debt deficit spending and to use the full faith and credit of the, you know, the Commonwealth of Virginia and the people of Alexandria, but they were not willing to share data about their economic projections, which was kind of comical, but also kind of sad. It really did not end very well, and the people involved in it have this stain on their record now forever.
Yeah, and it took up a lot of space during session. It just took up a lot of oxygen during session too. And that's the problem, in my opinion, with these issues, is then other things kind of get short shrift as everybody's focused on the back and forth. You know, Louise Lucas had some fun with that, and, you know, and it just kind of took up all the space in session. So to me, that's
it did, and weirdly, everything was tied to it, right? So the budget was tied to the arena, and even politics of, you know, we were talking about prison reform and canine dogs, and even stuff like that sort of got caught up in the undertow of the politics and who's with who and what committee is your bill going to, and what's the chairman of that. So yes, it did overshadow everything that was going on. The record number of vetoes, I suspect, would have happened anyway, because we have a Republican governor who is very willing to use his veto pen, and probably would have been arena or no arena.
That's probably true. It just felt somewhat petty to me, some of the things, but that could just be me in my particular perspective.
Wait, pettiness and politics? They never go together, right?
I kind of saw that. But so I also want to talk about the fact that you also use your show not just for politics, but for policy. So I sit on the advisory board of the Virginia Poverty Law Center, and you did a story on zombie mortgages, right? And these are issues that people don't understand, that impact in a very real way people's homes being foreclosed on for these second mortgages that were supposed to have been written off years ago. Usury laws that, or people get around usury laws by trying to give you a loan on your inheritance. I mean,
but they don't want to call it a loan.
But they don't. But
right,
so you raise up these things. Again, this affects real people who have no idea what this is or why they should pay attention to the fact until it happens to them. And then this is why I love the work of the Virginia Poverty Law Center. You have to find somebody to help you. But it also comes down to public policy. You have got to make public policy in Virginia that protects people from things like that. And it seems to me, how do you choose the things that you talk about? Of all there's a million things you could talk about, but how do you choose what you talk about?
Well, I do think there is some mystery to that, actually, because I don't know the story that I'm doing tomorrow. I think I've got some ideas, but actually hasn't quite happened yet. But I will say that I spend a long time following the topic of predatory lending. It's an interest. I mean, you talked about issues. I mean, we talk a lot about politics and fundraising numbers and polling, and all of that's very interesting, but I also really like getting into the details of actual policies. You mentioned zombie mortgages. You also mentioned the inheritance scam of these people loaning people money, but they're not calling it a loan because they don't want to deal with the interest caps. So those are sort of the modern flavors of all of this. But I spent years following the car title lending industry. These are businesses like LoanMax and TitleMax, and they would take people's car titles and then do some pretty extreme things to people and ruin their credits and ruin their lives, basically. And so I spent years following that and getting to know people who had been taken advantage of by these companies and trying to follow their campaign finance records and trying to figure out, what, if anything, might happen in the General Assembly. And that was something that I followed for a long time. And then, eventually there was a bill that capped the interest rates, and now they're all closed. Every LoanMax in Virginia is now closed, and the LoanMax in Arlandria, where I spend a lot of time in the parking lot of the LoanMax in Arlandria because I wanted to interview people coming in and out of it, and also to get photographs of it. And so the LoanMax in Arlandria, which is one of their key destination points, is now a laundromat. So change can happen. It might take a long period of time. But those same people that did LoanMax and CarMax, they're back at it. They're trying to give high interest loans online, or to people who have inheritance coming to them, or people who have taken out a second mortgage. And so, the people, you mentioned the Virginia Poverty Law Center, they follow all of that very carefully. And so one of the things I like to do is follow what bills they're lobbying for or against in the General Assembly.
And isn't foundationally the idea of our founding fathers that we should have a free and independent journalistic ethos in this country for that very reason?
They talked a good game, didn't they? Thomas Jefferson had a lot of
They did talk a good game, but
they also had horribly partisan newspapers. If you looked at the newspapers from the 1800s, you would be shocked at how very, very partisan they were. They did not make any pretense at being nonpartisan or independent or both sides. They did not both sides anything. They one-sided everything. And so really this is like this idea that media has to be fair and balanced, and nonpartisan. That's a 20th century phenomenon.
But the point is, people shouldn't be jailed. I think back to the abolitionists and how some people were put in jail for abolitionist tracts being delivered to the South.
John Adams is one of the most horrible people in American history because he put newspaper editors in jail for things that they wrote. There was a Philadelphia editor who was the grandson of Benjamin Franklin, who President Adams put in jail for something he put in his newspaper. So there's a history of this happening, yes.
Right, but we try to kind of avoid that these days and not jail journalists in this country. I mean, journalists are certainly jailed around the world, but we try not to jail journalists in this country, recognizing that there has to be, in addition to free speech, there has to be the free exercise of reporting. Like, our democracy kind of depends on the free flow of information. I mean, I think that's what I see you doing. That's what I see you doing, is doing that.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, you've picked up apart bits and pieces of what I look at, which is policy. I'm very interested in policy and, the political process in terms of people getting elected. And then I like to have a little fun with history and, the audio of the governor from the 1960s. And it's a little bit of everything, yeah.
But it is, but you make it interesting, right? Because people don't listen to something that is boring. And I think that's the other, I grew up, I'm a boomer. We had three television stations, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and when the president gave his speech, you couldn't watch anything, right? And that's not what anyone has today. Fewer and fewer people are alive who remember that Walter Cronkite, you could believe the guy, right? The Washington Post, right?
Let me tell you a story about Walter Cronkite. So one of my points of interest that I like to read about is the history of broadcast journalism. So when Walter Cronkite was coming up as a young journalist, he was a wire reporter and he was doing an obituary. And so he wanted to get the quote from the grieving widow. So he shows up at the doorstep of the grieving widow, knocks on the door, which I never did, by the way. I called the grieving widow. I didn't knock on their door, but that's what Walter Cronkite did. And so nobody shows up at the door. She might have, the widow might have been there, but nobody actually answers the door. So Walter Cronkite looks through the windows and sees a photograph, there in the opening to the house that he wants to use for the wire service obituary. So he breaks into the house and steals the photo, uses it on the wire service, and so this is Walter Cronkite as actually kind of a swashbuckling journalist himself.
Well, there you go. And was it actually the picture of the dead guy? Because it seems to me I may have heard this story, and the veracity maybe of whether it was or wasn't actually the person who was writing an obituary. Okay.
You're right. It turned out to be the wrong person.
We're going to come back. Join us after this break.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born, and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that! That's disgusting! Oh, poop already! You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 of 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh, no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school. Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
I know.
150 over 90. 180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we are talking with Michael Pope. He is an author, journalist, and a podcaster. He hosts Pod Virginia. And it is a podcast I listen to faithfully every week.
Thank you for
twice
listening.
a week. And what I love is how the show has evolved, because I'm one of the original listeners of Transition Virginia with Thomas Bowman.
Way back, yeah.
Way back with Thomas Bowman. Now Lauren Burke has become your co-host, and she is wonderful. But you also have these segments that I think make it engaging and entertaining, because I do think people have come to expect that their information should be engaging and to some extent entertaining. And so you have,
I want my information to be engaging and entertaining. I mean, right.
So there you are. And so but now you're producing it. So you have a trivia question. You throw a trivia question out. That
Fun fact,
answer.
the trivia question was a creation of artificial intelligence. So right when ChatGPT initially came out, Thomas Bowman was a big supporter of AI in general and ChatGPT. And so we asked ChatGPT for all of these suggestions about how to make the podcast better, what segments we might have. And it was AI that suggested the trivia question.
And it was great because people love to engage with it. Talk around the water cooler is also very interesting.
No, I will say, I also tried to get AI to come up with good trivia questions, and AI was horrible. I've never used an AI trivia question because they're terrible. But the idea of doing the trivia question was AI.
Right. But you are a historian and you've done a lot of research, so your trivia questions generally tend to be quite challenging. But there are still people out there who are honed in on it. The water cooler is great, but I love buy, sell, or hold. I don't know how you came up with buy, sell, or hold, but it is a great, during session, you go to different, well, I think is it Scott Surville's office that you use mostly this?
We rotate. There was
Alfonso's.
most recently it was in Surville's office.
Surville, Alfonso Lopez, you had Sia Price filled in, Marcus Simon is part of this game show team, and then Shannon Taylor?
No, we did have to see oh, you're talking about Sarah Taylor.
Sarah Taylor
was the longtime lobbyist for the city of Alexandria, who has recently moved into working at a firm in, like a lobbying firm in Richmond. But Sarah Taylor's part of what we call the Pod Virginia All-Stars, right? So, which are the contestants for the game show. And I will say, I had an idea. I wanted to do a game show, and I pitched it to our team. Everybody thought I was crazy for suggesting that we do a game show. And how's this going to work? And is it going to be hokey? And I'm not afraid of being hokey. Okay, so that wasn't a problem for me. But so we actually tried to do a game show. The first one was kind of a flop, frankly. And then I changed the format up a little bit, and we eventually came around to buy, sell, or hold, which we normally do with the Pod Virginia All-Stars, but they're not always available. So we have people come in, like a Sia Price would come in, and we also had. Senator Jeremy McPike came as a guest All-Star, and so yeah, it is really interesting as a format because it's sort of ostensibly funny and like a match game vibe. That's what I was trying to create, but we actually end up talking about real issues with elected officials and people who know what they're talking about.
And the thing that I like about it, generally the answers are very short because it's designed so on, legalizing skills games, buy, sell, or hold. And then if you're going to sell, don't like the idea, this is why. Oh, I'm going to buy, I like the idea, this is why. Or hold, which always gets a boo and a hiss because then you're not being committal in that, so it's a cop-out.
The first few times we did it, everybody was a hold all the time, and I said, we can't keep doing this.
Yeah.
So then we created social stigma if you decide to hold, that's where you get the booing and the hissing.
Yeah.
And it creates a different flavor to the game.
But it's kind of like if you think about how Twitter was designed to be originally 140 characters, and you just had to be really good if you were going to say something impactful in 140 characters. To me, buy, sell, and hold is basically this idea that you're putting something out there and you're asking for sort of an lightning round, but people have to be pretty concise and pretty quick.
I'll give you a good example. I mean, like your set here, I'm Abai, this lovely image of the Capitol. I'm just transfixed by it. I mean, it's very nice.
There you go.
Abai on the mirrored thing you got.
I tell you, so this is we know we're bringing it here. We are. But to me, this is what makes the podcast interesting and engaging. But you actually have people who are making the policy, people who are knowledgeable, and you're trying to relay that in a way that people can understand that these things matter. We can't just assume someone else somewhere else is taking care of business. I think a lot of people would like to believe that they don't have to think about how the sausage gets made or how laws get made or how policy gets made until it impacts them personally. And then when something happens to them personally, then it's like, OMG, where
so they get scammed by Title Max.
Yeah, then who's going to help me and where do I turn? And this whole thing is just unbelievable. But to me, it's kind of like you constantly have to dip into the well and keep yourself informed about the things that really are an issue, the public policy that's being made, because there are issues and people are being impacted, whether it's you personally or not. So that kind of brings us to, how do people choose whom to support, especially in primaries when all the people running, or most of them, are your friends. So let's just talk about Congressional District 10, where we have 12 people running, and I would say that the majority of them are my friends. Right? And they're all wonderful people. And unlike a previous primary that we were talking about, when Don Beyer in CD 8 was running to replace Jim Moran, we started out with 13, and then it got winnowed down. People dropped out. People threw their endorsement behind Don Beyer. Yeah. Right? So he got elected, and that's how we did it. But here we are all these years later, however many years later, and this is not happening in Congressional District 10.
So it is unexpected for congressional seats to open up. So it's actually kind of rare for congressional seats to open up, because these people tend to like to be in them for very long periods of time. So when Jim Moran finally decided he was not going to seek yet another term in Congress, there was a huge number of people that wanted to be the Democratic nominee to run in that election. Unfortunately for most of them, there was a front runner in the race who swamped everybody else. And so, what we saw in that election, which I believe was 2014, was a lot of candidates dropping out and endorsing Beyer. So, on the ballot, there were a lot of candidates, but by the time the election actually happened, half of those people had dropped out and endorsed Beyer. We are not seeing that in this election cycle. All. So, and if you think about the 10th, the outgoing incumbent has endorsed one candidate, the Washington Post has endorsed somebody else, and I think McAuliffe has even endorsed another. I mean, so, there's a lot of, it's spread out among all of those candidates, and right now at this hour, we don't really have a good idea who's going to win that race. Actually, it's good from a journalist standpoint, because some of these races, everybody already knows the outcome of them. And so, but this one is actually quite exciting for that reason, is that, it's so tight, and several of those candidates might end up winning on election night.
They could, and I do.
All your friends.
All my friends. Well, one of them, hopefully one of my friends will win. But it's hard to say which of my friends will win, and it makes it difficult. But also CD10, we had redistricting, which changed some of the dynamics, the competitiveness of some of the congressional districts.
It made it a Loudoun seat. I mean, that's another thing.
Did.
I think there is a logic to the way Virginia has been districted in a way the previous districts did not really communicate a certain kind of geographic logic. The current boundaries do, and it's a Loudoun seat.
It definitely, and we've got candidates who are not in that Loudoun district who are running, and there's just a lot of people running. There really are, but it's a reliably, or it's more blue than purple. So generally, when you win the primary, there's an expectation you've won the seat. Definitely in like Congressional District 8, on the eastern part of Northern Virginia, when you win the primary, you've won. Loudoun,
or the 11th, or there are a number of seats.
But but the 10th has gotten to be that way since Wexton took the seat from Barbara Comstock, who inherited it from Frank Wolf. Now CD7, which is more Prince William, Fauquier, although it takes up a fairly large geographic footprint, is far more competitive, if I'm reading that right. So it is not just if you win the primary, you've won. I mean, there's strong candidates in the GOP primary. There's strong candidates, one very well-funded candidate on the Democratic side. And so CD7 is going to be kind of interesting too.
Yes, definitely. I mean, the redistricting has really kind of tightened up a lot of the congressional races in a way that makes them, makes them much more fun to watch. And also, there is a logic to the geography. You know, like there's a Prince William-based seat and a Loudoun-based seat, and those are the areas where you've seen the population growth, and so it just makes a lot of sense. You know, there was a lot of upheaval during the election where, you know, a lot of candidates got roped into districts where you had more than one member, and so there was a transition period. But now that we're on the other side of that transition period, the districts actually make a lot of sense, and several of them are competitive.
So Prince William is kind of well known for being like minority, majority county. I think one of the most diverse counties possibly in the country is Prince William County. And yet it's interesting to look at the two front runners, depending on how you define front runners, in both the Democratic and the GOP primary for CD7. Not necessarily, I would say, representative of the diversity of the population.
Well, it's interesting they're all military people. I mean,
they are, and that's huge, obviously.
And you know, you can definitely see a fall election where it's competitive and voters actually, you know, have a choice. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be a race to watch as we get into the fall.
Yeah, I think so too. So closer to home, you've been doing quite a lot of like moderating in Arlington and Alexandria for primaries at city council and mayoral and Arlington board level. So it's interesting that you've been tapped to come in and help, you know, moderate, and in one case you actually ended up doing an interview of the only candidate who showed up. So is this something that you've been doing for a while? I mean, do people know to tap you and say, we've got these candidate events and we'd like you to be our guy?
Yeah, I've done quite a number of these things for the Alexandria Democratic Committee primary, like when they've got city council candidates. And so there are 6 seats for city council in Alexandria, which usually means there are like 12, 13, 14 candidates. And so I've done a number of these things where you get all the people on the stage and I'm kind of moderating as they have very small turns at the microphone. So I've done that sort of thing for a number of times. And then, you know, the folks in Arlington will have me come do debates for their county board. And then, as you mentioned just recently, we did one with all the city council candidates and one of the 3 candidates for mayor.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about that when we come back from our break.
Okay.
When we come back from our break, we will be talking with Michael Pope, who has got something to tell us about the upcoming primaries, which are 8 days away.
Hi. Hoping for a crisp breeze to help keep you alert. Oh, he took a sip of water too. That'll probably help. You were probably gonna turn down the radio too, so you could focus, right?
Probably okay isn't okay.
Right?
If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend.
I think the water line is what really drove it home. I blew on him.
What's wrong with the world, mama? People living like they ain't got no mamas. I think the whole world's addicted to the drama, only attracted to things that'll bring the trauma. Yeah, madness is what you demonstrate, and that's exactly how anger works and operates. Man, you gotta have love just to set it straight. Take control of your mind and meditate. Let your soul gravitate to the love, y'all.
People killing, people dying, children hurt and you hear them crying. When you practice what you preach, what you turn the other
Ma'am,
cheek.
you forgot your purse.
Oh, you don't know how worried I was. Thank you very much.
Hey.
Honesty. Pass it on.
Nice move, kid.
Donut?
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we are talking to Michael Pope. He is an author, he is a journalist, he is a podcaster, and he is also a great moderator for candidate forums. So let's talk a little bit about some of the moderating that you've been doing lately. What have been some of the highlights of these different events that you have hosted?
So late in the past, actually in the past week, I've done two really interesting ones. One was for Alexandria, excuse me, where we had, excuse me, where we had invited all three candidates for mayor, but only one of them actually showed up. That was Aaliyah Gaskins.
Right.
I think you heard the audio.
I heard it.
Of the conversation with Aaliyah Gaskins. That actually you can listen to as a podcast on the Black Virginia News podcast. The conversation with Aaliyah Gaskins. It was, I thought, kind of interesting that Vice Mayor Amy Jackson did not show up to the candidate forum. She could have been there. She decided not to. Also, Steve Peterson is another candidate who actually told us that he was coming until the day of the event and then canceled the day of the event. So we had one candidate show up and do this forum for the West End Business Association, and that was Aaliyah Gaskins. So that was a very interesting forum. The other one I did recently that I thought was really interesting was for Arlington County Board. So there's one open seat in Arlington County. It's a longtime member Libby Garvey is not running for re-election, so there's an open seat, 5 candidates. And we were at Innovation Elementary School where I was moderating the discussion. And you know, one of the big hot issues in Arlington is pickleball.
Oh yes,
Right.
Yes I know.
So candidates actually have positions, pro and con, on the topic of expanding pickleball or not expanding pickleball. So there's all these, county-owned facilities. Should pickleball be expanded or not expanded? And this is a fault line for Arlington politics.
I can imagine. You know why? 2 things. Well, more than 2 things, but I will tell you this. It's the noise. It is the fact that it is overtaking the tennis courts, which would otherwise be tennis courts, and the fact that parking, the fact that it goes late. I mean, the neighbors are like, we don't want pickleball 24/7 making this noise, and there are pickleball courts, but there are people playing pickleball on tennis courts.
There was a front page New York Times story about the Arlington pickleball battles. Sunday New York Times front page story. So this has actually attracted national attention. And so the candidates, have been asked their positions on pickleball, pro or con. For the Arlington Democratic Committee debate, we had questions submitted in advance, and one of them was why the candidates were changing their position on pickleball, because they were on record for pickleball, and then word got around that some of the candidates actually or were now speaking about that issue differently than they had in the past. So I asked the candidates, if they, not only what their position on pickleball was, but had they changed their position on pickleball. And one of the candidates actually said that she had learned more about it, and yes, she actually had evolved her thinking on it. And the question was probably aimed at her. The question that was submitted was actually probably aimed at her as a candidate. So when she was done, I made a joke, and I'm not sure if I regret it or not. Catherine, let me get your thoughts on this particular joke. Okay, so if you change your vote on pickleball, is that a half sour? No. So you don't like, I can tell from your face, you don't think that was
sour. No, fell a little flat. Yeah, journalism's probably your strong suit. I wouldn't try stand-up comedy.
Keep my day job.
I think you need to keep your day job.
Right.
But still, you made
maybe
the effort.
Your audience thinks differently.
Well,
they should leave.
But still, but I did hear the interview with Aaliyah Gaskins, and I got to tell you, it was impressive on a number of levels, because she was not prepared to be the only candidate, but you had great questions that were meant for more than one person, and it ended up being a really good back and forth. I mean, I actually served with Leah Gaskins on a regional commission, and I found out more about her in that interview than I would have otherwise known about her.
Oh, great.
So I think sometimes things work out, even if on the face of it, it's like, this kind of was a bust, maybe not.
Well, the organizers of this event was the West End Business Association in Alexandria, and they actually, you know, people often struggle with what do we call these things? Is it a debate? Is it a forum? They wanted to call it conversations with candidates. And so as a conversation, it worked very well.
It did, because
you had one person, and then you can kind of dig in, and I love the follow-up question. And so, you know, one thing that I do with these forums is listen very carefully so that I could ask the follow-up question. And the fact that Amy Jackson was unwilling to come to the debate and Stephen Peterson was unwilling to come to the debate meant that I had more time to ask follow-up questions of Leah Gaskins. And so I thought it worked very well.
I thought it did too, and she really had answers to your questions. I mean, real answers.
She had clearly thought about these issues and talked to many people about them. I mean, another thing that I find really interesting about this campaign is that we have seen Leah Gaskins on the campaign trail. I saw her at the Tenants and Workers event in Arlandria. I saw her at the bicycle event. I saw her at the Chamber of Commerce event. It's like she has been to all of the top tier events and all of the mid tier events and all of the low tier events, and then everybody that wants, you know, Leah Gaskins to come talk about her campaign. So the other candidates are not doing that. And so they're really, you know, the campaign for mayor is actually very interesting.
It is, and also for the Alexandria City Council too, because you mentioned that there's a lot of candidates.
Well, I believe it's 11, right? Yeah,
right.
Six seats, 11 candidates. And so
how many are incumbents?
Oh, you know what? I knew you were going to ask me complicated questions. I should have had my notebook here.
Well, I know, and the one I know is John.
It's a handful. You know, there are some open seats because Leah Gaskins and Amy Jackson are both incumbents, right? So,
and they're running for mayor, so there's at least two. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's, you know, this is, and again, it's a presidential year, and what I find is that the highest voter turnout in Virginia in our 4-year cycle, and we do have a 4-year cycle. People are like, I vote every election. No, they don't. They vote every 4 years for president. So people don't understand we have elections here every year. Mm-hmm. But this is a
multiple times a year, right? Multiple times. If you think about the primary is so often the election in so many circumstances. That,
including this one. Yeah, exactly. But they show up in a presidential year and they don't know the candidates because they showed up to vote for the president. And this year we're voting for a U.S. Senator, we're voting for congressional representatives, which if your incumbent is running, then that's not a problem. But in CD7 and CD10, they're open seats. So you're not going to recognize the name of the person you thought represented you. You're going to see all these other people in the primary. But even in the general, you're going to see names, you're like, I don't know who these people are, because you came to vote for president. So how do we kind of break through to help people understand in Virginia, you'd think they would, but they don't, that you've got to be paying attention to who those 11 people are, because once they're elected, they're there making policy closest to your front door.
Mm-hmm. You know, I struggle with this because this is kind of what I'm trying to aim my podcast is that, you know, like so many of my neighbors are very smart, well-educated people, and they follow Washington politics so closely, and they can tell you everything about, you know, Senator Manchin, but they don't know who their state senator is, right? And so often the stuff that happens in state government is actually way more important to your life than anything that could ever happen with the federal government. But people don't follow state politics in the same way, which is, I mean, I'm trying to aim my podcast right at that.
And I think you are, and that's what I find is so interesting too, is that, and you still find time to do things locally. You live in Alexandria, so you have made yourself.
You know, I covered Alexandria city politics for a number of years before I started doing public radio, and so yeah, I like to follow city politics.
You do, and you show
politics in Fairfax City are certainly interesting as well.
They are interesting, but I know that you also follow things like, you know, the zoning for housing, the missing middle, all of these names given to things like the affordable housing crisis, which is all over Northern Virginia, it's all over the country. Every community is struggling with how to house people, right? And so Alexandria can build tall buildings. In Fairfax City, we don't. We have height restrictions, so we don't build tall buildings where I am. It makes it much harder in 6.2 square miles to house people when you have limited not just the dirt you can build on, but how high you're willing to go. And so that's one of the things that, you know, I know that you've been following is like, how do we make policies that house more people? And Leah Gaskins talked about that too. How do we build the kind of housing in the right price range so that people have a place to live? These are tough subjects.
They're tough subjects, and they're important, and they have actually layers of history to them. You know, the history of exclusionary zoning is very interesting, and kind of the Jim Crow origins of single-family zoning is really shocking when you see the documents that lay out the, you know, that you had to be white in order to own property, or that you could not be black, or that they got all this language in these documents, you know, these contemporaneous documents from the Jim Crow era, and it's shocking to see it in print. And that's the origin of single-family only zoning, which Arlington and Alexandria are moving away from. But that actually is on the ballot, because the candidates have very clear positions. There are, you know, candidates that are in favor of these zoning changes, and then there are a number of candidates that are running their campaigns and basing their appeal to voters on their opposition to those zoning changes. And so, you know, this is American democracy. One side is going to win.
One is, and land use issues are always the biggest ones. Before we wrap up the show, I do want to recommend your book, The Bird Machine. I read it, I enjoyed it. It explains a lot about Virginia politics, who the people were, things like redlining, you know, the interstates that bisected historically black neighborhoods, why we vote the way we do. All of that is in your book, and it really is very, very informational. And the other thing is your podcast. We've talked about it a lot here tonight, but Pod Virginia really is doing a huge service to the Commonwealth of Virginia. And, you know, and it's free to listen to, although support is always welcome, but it's free to listen to. And if people just go out there and look for the podcast and listen to it, I think people will understand that you are really trying to marry politics, policy, and people's quality of life.
And have a little bit of fun along the way, too.
And have fun along the way, too, because it's really important for people to be edutained. Edutained. Yeah. I guess that under a category, it's like Pod Virginia, edutainment, right?
Well, that's what your show is, too.
Well,
yeah,
not exactly. I don't think it's quite like your show. I don't have any kind of cool guests, but I do have this wonderful Capitol building.
This Capitol. Yeah. Shout out to Marcus Simon, who I know hosts this.
That's absolutely.
Shout out to Holly Seabold, who was a guest recently on your podcast. I saw Ben Tribbett on your show.
Ben has been
this
here.
Stage, you had a lot of the big names.
Big names
right
that you, Michael Pope, are now legendary in the Hall of Fame here on Inside Scoop. Thank you for joining us.